Jadasloff's claws tightened around the control panel as the ship's frame trembled violently. The vibration was so intense that it sent a shiver up his spine. The flashing red lights inside the cockpit made the Ketheri pilot's pale, scaled skin glow under the crimson hue. The alarm system blared in sharp pulses, a high-pitched wail that cut through his eardrums like glass. He adjusted the thrusters, pulling back on the flight controls, but the ship only shuddered harder. "Warning," the AI chimed in, its calm, synthetic voice unnerving against the chaos. "Clutch system failure. Primary stabilizers offline. Structural integrity at 48% and falling." Jadasloff bared his fangs. His breath quickened as he scanned the status display. The gravitational clutch was failing. No, failing wasn't the right word. It was collapsing. His sleek black and silver starship was spiraling uncontrollably through the dense asteroid field, the shattered remains of other competitors drifting in the distance like floating tombstones. He slapped the console. "Override stabilizers. Route power from auxiliary thrusters." "Override rejected," the AI responded. "Clutch system is unresponsive." Jadasloff cursed in his native tongue. He had trained for years for this moment. The Galactic Star Race was the most dangerous competition in the known galaxy. The best pilots from every species competed to prove their superiority. Only the Ketheri had ever claimed victory. Jadasloff was expected to win. The High Council had placed their faith in him. Losing was not an option. The ship jolted sideways, throwing him against the seat harness. The crash restraint dug painfully into his chest. His vision blurred for a moment as sparks exploded from the console. Structural integrity at 32%. Jadasloff's claws trembled over the console. He forced himself to stay calm. A Ketheri never panicked. Even now, as his ship plummeted through a swirling field of debris and jagged ice, he reminded himself that fear was weakness. He had to think. He had to act. The AI spoke again. "Recommendation: emergency pod ejection." Jadasloff's eyes narrowed. The AI was suggesting surrender. If he ejected, he would lose the race. His name would be stained. His honor would be lost. No Ketheri had ever survived the shame of withdrawal. He had come too far to let it end like this. "No," Jadasloff growled. "I can fix this. Clutch system non-functional. There is no alternative solution." Jadasloff's mind raced. The clutch system regulated gravitational balance and directional thrust. Without it, the ship was doomed. He needed a miracle. Then he heard it. A faint static crackled through the comms. Jadasloff frowned and adjusted the signal frequency. The interference grew louder. A voice emerged through the noise. Rough, human. Hello. Anyone out there?" Jadasloff's eyes narrowed. "Who is this?" "Oh good, it's working. Listen. This is Josh. Looks like you're having some clutch trouble." Jadasloff's claws curled over the console. Human. Disgusting. Weak. Inferior. What was a human doing in the middle of the Galactic Star Race? This was sacred territory for elite pilots, not some wandering primate from a backwater planet. Jadasloff sneered. "My ship's condition is none of your concern, human." "Oh, I think it is," Josh replied. His tone was almost amused. "You see, I've been monitoring the race, and it looks to me like your clutch system is shot. You're not gonna make it out of that field unless you fix it." Jadasloff's eyes narrowed. And what would a human know about Ketheri clutch systems? Josh's voice crackled through the comms. "A clutch is a clutch, doesn't matter if it's human or alien tech." Jadasloff's scales tightened along his jawline. The arrogance of this human was unbearable. And yet, the ship's frame groaned as another asteroid scraped along the hull, sending a sharp vibration through the cockpit. Jadasloff gritted his teeth. The AI was silent now. His ship was dying. "You think you can repair a Ketheri clutch?" "I can try." Josh's voice was calm, steady. Jadasloff hesitated. Accepting help from a human would be disgraceful. It would tarnish his record. But if he refused, he was dead. "Fine," Jadasloff said. "Dock with the rear airlock. You have 5 minutes." "Copy that." "Be there in 3, Josh replied. Jadasloff cut the comms and leaned back. He couldn't believe what he was doing. 3 minutes later, a dull thud resonated through the ship as the human's vessel docked with the airlock. Jadasloff unlatched his harness and stalked toward the maintenance bay. His tail lashed behind him as the inner door slid open with a hiss. Josh stepped through. He was shorter than Jadasloff had expected, with shaggy brown hair and a casual, almost lazy posture. He wore a grease-stained jumpsuit and carried a battered toolkit slung over one shoulder. Jadasloff's scales rippled in distaste. "You are smaller than I expected." Josh smirked. "Yeah, I get that a lot." Jadasloff's tail twitched. "Follow me." They moved to the engine compartment. The clutch housing was sparking, thin trails of smoke curling from the seams. Josh knelt beside it and opened his toolkit. His hands moved quickly, effortlessly. Jadasloff watched in disbelief. Josh wasn't consulting a manual or relying on a computer. He was working by feel. Josh's brow furrowed. "Yeah, this is bad. The magnetic coupling is fried. Looks like someone sabotaged it." Jadasloff's eyes narrowed. "Sabotage?" Josh nodded. "Yeah, someone wanted you to fail." He glanced over his shoulder. "I can bypass the coupling using a human-style regulator, but it's gonna stress the engine." Jadasloff's tail twitched. "Do it." Josh grinned. "Knew you'd say that." Jadasloff watched as Josh removed the damaged components and replaced them with parts from his toolkit. The human's hands were steady, his eyes sharp. The ship groaned beneath them, but the trembling began to ease. Josh wiped his hands on his jumpsuit. "Try it now." Jadasloff stepped toward the console and activated the clutch system. The engine purred smoothly. Stabilizers re-engage. The ship's frame stopped vibrating. The AI's voice returned. Structural integrity restored. Clutch system operational. Jadasloff's jaw tightened. "How did you do that?" Josh stood and shrugged. "Like I said, a clutch is a clutch." Jadasloff studied him for a long moment. For the first time, he felt something he never expected toward a human: respect. The ship's proximity alarm suddenly blared. A red icon flashed across the display. "Hostile ship inbound," the AI announced. Jadasloff turned to Josh. Josh grinned and cracked his knuckles. "Well," Josh said, "looks like you'll need more than just a clutch to win this thing." Jadasloff's claws tightened over the console. His eyes gleamed. "Then let's see what human ingenuity can really do." Jadasloff watched as Josh worked, his hands moving swiftly over the console. The human's fingers flew across the controls with surprising precision, adjusting the stabilizers and recalibrating the clutch system. Jadasloff stood behind him, his claws flexing at his sides. The ship hummed beneath his feet, the damage from earlier fading as the systems began to stabilize. Josh leaned back and wiped the sweat from his brow. "There, that should hold for now." Jadasloff's eyes narrowed. "You said someone sabotaged it. How?" Josh crouched down, running his fingers along the edges of the clutch housing. "See this burn pattern here?" He pointed to a thin, charred line running along the magnetic coupling. "That wasn't natural. Someone installed a time disruption charge. It fried the connection at the worst possible moment." Jadasloff's tail flicked irritably. "Only a select few have access to my ship's systems." Josh glanced up. "Then you've got a mole." Jadasloff's claws scraped against the metal floor. The idea of betrayal within his own ranks was unthinkable. The Cathari were proud warriors. Loyalty was in their blood. Treachery was punished by death. Whoever did this wasn't just trying to sabotage the race. They were trying to kill him. Josh stood and stretched, his jumpsuit stained with oil and grease. "So, what's the plan?" Jadasloff's slitted eyes narrowed. We finished the race. Josh's eyebrows lifted. With this? He kicked the base of the clutch housing. This thing is held together with spit and prayers. You're not gonna make it past the next quadrant. Jadasloff's scales bristled. I refuse to surrender. Josh smirked. I like your style. He ran his hand through his shaggy hair and grinned. Okay, Captain Lizard. Let's see if we can't get you to the finish line. Jadasloff growled. Do not call me Captain Lizard. Josh chuckled. All right, all right. He moved back to the console. But you're gonna need more than just a working clutch to win. These races aren't just about speed. They're about strategy. Jadasloff crossed his arms. And you believe a human can teach me strategy? Josh shrugged. We humans are pretty good at surviving impossible odds. Jadasloff's jaw tightened. He hated to admit it, but the human had already saved his life once. Perhaps there was more to this primitive species than he'd assumed. Suddenly, the proximity alarm blared. Multiple hostile vessels approaching. The AI announced. Jadasloff's eyes flashed. He stepped toward the console, his claws tapping rapidly against the screen. 3 enemy ships were closing in fast, their sleek black frames cutting through the asteroid field with predatory grace. They're Ketheri, Jadasloff said. Josh frowned. Your own people? Not my people, Jadasloff growled. Mercenaries. Josh's eyes narrowed. Sabotage wasn't. Jadasloff's hands tightened over the controls. They won't get that chance. Josh leaned over the console. Okay, what's the plan? Jadasloff's slitted eyes flashed toward him. You repair the damage. I fly. Josh raised an eyebrow. You sure you trust me with your ship? Jadasloff hesitated for only a moment. I don't have a choice. Josh grinned. Good enough for me. He dropped to his knees beside the clutch housing and pulled out a toolkit. All right, Captain Lizard. Let's see what this baby can do. Jadasloff ignored the nickname and gripped the controls. The enemy ships were getting closer. Targeting scanners lit up the console, tracking their movements. Jadasloff's muscles tensed. He had faced death before, but never like this. His ship was damaged, his systems unstable, and his only ally was a human. Josh, Jadasloff said through clenched teeth. How long? Josh tightened a bolt. 2 minutes. Jadasloff's claws dug into the controls. 2 minutes was a lifetime in a dogfight. The first enemy ship opened fire. Plasma bolts screamed past the hull, close enough to leave burn trails on the outer plating. Jadasloff rolled the ship to the right, cutting through a narrow gap between 2 asteroids. The mercenary ship followed, weapons blazing. Jadasloff pushed the thrusters to full. The ship shuddered violently, barely holding together. Come on, Josh muttered as he connected 2 frayed wires. Sparks flew, and the clutch housing vibrated under his hands. Jadasloff spun the ship to the left, narrowly avoiding another barrage of plasma fire. The asteroid field was thick with debris, jagged rocks drifting lazily through the black void. Jadasloff's eyes narrowed as he spotted a large asteroid drifting toward them. Josh's eyes widened. You see that, right? Jadasloff's claws flexed over the controls. Of course. You're not gonna try to. Jadasloff's eyes gleamed. He pushed the thrusters to maximum. The ship accelerated toward the asteroid. Josh's face went pale. You're insane. The asteroid filled the viewport. The mercenary ship followed closely behind, its guns firing wildly. Jadasloff waited until the last possible moment, then spun the ship sideways and activated the gravitational thrusters. The ship twisted sharply, sliding through a narrow gap in the asteroid side. The mercenary ship wasn't so lucky. It slammed into the asteroid with a deafening explosion, sending shockwaves through the field. Josh let out a low whistle. Okay, that was impressive. Jadasloff's expression remained cold. 1 down. Josh secured the last bolt. And you're good to go. Jadasloff's eyes narrowed. The remaining two mercenary ships were closing in. Josh grinned. "What are you waiting for? Let's take these guys down." Jadasloff's mouth curled into a dangerous smile. "With pleasure." The ship accelerated. Jadasloff pushed the controls hard, weaving through the asteroid field. The enemy ships followed, their plasma cannons lighting up the dark void. Jadasloff rolled hard to the right, cutting behind a large chunk of debris. Josh was back at the weapons console now. "Want me to return the favor?" Jadasloff's slitted eyes gleamed. "Do it." Josh's hands flew over the controls. The ship's cannons charged with a low hum. Plasma fire streaked toward the nearest enemy ship, cutting across its wings. The ship spun out of control and crashed into a nearby asteroid, erupting in a fiery explosion. Jadasloff's tail flicked. "Impressive." Josh winked. "Like I said, humans know how to survive." The last enemy ship broke off, retreating into the shadows. Jadasloff exhaled slowly. His heart was pounding, but his mind was clear. Josh leaned back in the co-pilot's seat, stretching his legs. "So, how about you let me stick around for the rest of the race?" Jadasloff's gaze remained fixed on the stars. "You're a liability." Josh grinned. "Sure, but I'm also the reason you're not a smear on the side of that asteroid." Jadasloff's jaw tightened. He hated that the human was right. Josh sat back and folded his arms. "So what's it gonna be, Captain Lizard?" Jadasloff's tail flicked. His eyes narrowed. "You survive the next quadrant," he said, "and we'll talk." Josh's grin widened. "That's all I needed to hear." Jadasloff turned toward the console. The engines thrummed beneath his feet. The race wasn't over yet, and for the first time, Jadasloff had the strangest feeling, like he might actually win. Jadasloff's claws tightened over the flight controls as the ship shot through the asteroid field. The vibration of the thrusters hummed beneath his feet, a low rumble that signaled the engine's strained condition. The damage from earlier had weakened the ship's structural integrity, but it was holding together for me. Josh sat in the co-pilot's seat, his feet casually propped up on the console. He was grinning like this was some kind of joyride. Jadasloff didn't understand how the human could remain so calm. The race wasn't just about winning. It was about survival now. "You know," Josh said, "for a guy with scales, you're surprisingly tense." Jadasloff's slitted eyes narrowed. "I am not tense." Josh chuckled. "Oh, you're tense. I can see it in your tail." He pointed toward Jadasloff's tail, which was flicking aggressively against the seat behind him. Jadasloff growled low in his throat. "Concentrate on the targeting system." Josh shrugged. Fine. Just trying to keep things light." His fingers tapped across the targeting console as he pulled up a tactical display. "All right, Captain Lizard, we got two ships closing in fast from the rear. They're armed and not exactly looking to play nice." Jadasloff's eyes narrowed as he glanced at the display. The two enemy ships were positioned perfectly to cut them off from the next gate. The asteroid field was thinning out, which meant they'd soon be in open space. That would make them easy targets. "They're Ketheri ships," Jadasloff growled. "Sabotage didn't work. Now they're trying to kill me directly." Josh's grin widened. "Well, if they want to play dirty." He flipped a switch. "Let's give them something to worry about." Jadasloff's eyes narrowed as the targeting display lit up. "You modified the weapons." Josh's grin didn't fade. "I made some adjustments." The two enemy ships were gaining ground, their sleek frames cutting through the emptiness like black arrows. Plasma charges flared at their noses as their targeting scanners locked onto Jadasloff's ship. Josh's hands hovered over the firing controls. "Just say the word, Captain Lizard." Jadasloff's tail curled. "Fire." Josh slammed his hand down on the controls. The ship's cannons roared to life, twin beams of red plasma shooting toward the nearest enemy vessel. The first shot hit dead center, ripping through the forward shields. The ship spiraled out of control, smoke trailing behind it. The second ship darted sideways, its pilot reacting quickly to avoid the next blast. Jadasloff twisted the controls, sending their ship into a steep dive toward the surface of a nearby moon. The ship's hull screamed under the pressure, but Jadasloff held it steady. Josh laughed. "All right, now this is pod racing." Jadasloff shot him a sharp look. "What?" "Nothing." Josh pulled up the tactical display. "All right, one down, one to go." The remaining ship accelerated, firing a stream of plasma toward them. Jadasloff rolled hard to the left, narrowly avoiding the blast. The plasma shot hit the moon's surface below, creating a massive explosion of dust and rock. Josh's hands flew across the controls. Shields are down to 30%. Jadasloff's jaw tightened. He pushed the thrusters to maximum. "Hold on." The ship shot through the thin atmosphere of the moon, skimming low across the rocky surface. Jagged cliffs rose up around them, the gray landscape flashing past in a blur. The enemy ship followed, closing the distance fast. Josh frowned. "But you got a plan." Jadasloff's eyes gleamed. "Yes." Josh's mouth twisted. "I don't like that tone." Ahead, a narrow canyon opened up between two massive cliffs. Jadasloff adjusted their heading, lining up the ship's trajectory perfectly with the canyon entrance. Josh's eyes widened. No. You're not seriously." Jadasloff didn't answer. He pushed the controls forward. The ship dove into the canyon, the walls flashing past in a blur of gray and black. The enemy ship followed. Josh shouted, "We don't fit in here." Jadasloff's expression remained calm. His claws tightened over the controls as he adjusted their pitch and roll with precise movements. The ship scraped dangerously close to the rock walls, sparks flying from the hull. "Jadasloff," Josh yelled. Jadasloff's eyes flashed. "Trust me." The enemy ship fired, a plasma blast screaming toward them. Jadasloff cut the engines, letting the ship drop. The plasma shot passed inches over their hull, striking the cliff face ahead. The explosion sent rocks tumbling down into the canyon. Josh's face twisted. "That's your plan. Get us buried alive." Jadasloff's mouth curled into a sharp smile. "No." He pushed the thrusters to maximum and pulled the ship into a hard climb. The ship shot upward, just as the falling rocks slammed into the enemy ship behind them. The ship was crushed under the weight of the debris and exploded in a fiery blast. Josh's mouth dropped open. "Okay, I take it back. That was awesome." Jadasloff's breathing was steady. He adjusted their course, heading toward the next gate in the race. The targeting display showed no more enemy ships in range. Josh leaned back, his eyes wide. "I don't..." Jadasloff didn't respond. His eyes were focused on the horizon. The next gate was in sight, a glowing ring of blue energy suspended in the black void of space. Josh rubbed the back of his neck. "So, what's next?" Jadasloff's tail curled thoughtfully. "Now we race." Josh chuckled. "Oh, you mean all of this wasn't part of the race?" Jadasloff's expression darkened. This was only the beginning. Suddenly, the proximity alarm blared. Josh's eyes widened as a cluster of red dots lit up the tactical display. Josh's mouth twisted. Jadasloff." Jadasloff's claws flexed over the controls. "I see them." Josh's expression darkened. "Yeah, but you're not gonna like this." Jadasloff's gaze sharpened as he focused on the display. The cluster of red dots was huge, far larger than any single fleet should have been. Josh's face paled. "That's a war fleet." Jadasloff's jaw tightened. His mind raced. This wasn't just sabotage anymore. This was an ambush. Josh sat up straighter. "So, what's the plan?" Jadasloff's eyes flashed. "We don't stop." Josh's mouth opened. "Excuse me." Jadasloff pushed the thrusters forward. "We race." Josh's grin returned. "You're crazy." Jadasloff's tail flicked. Perhaps. The ship accelerated toward the next gate, the stars blurring around them. The war fleet shifted position, forming a blockade ahead. Josh's eyes narrowed. They're trying to box us in. Jadasloff's mouth curled into a dangerous smile. Let them try. Josh's fingers hovered over the weapons console. Just say the word, Captain Lizard. Jadasloff's eyes gleamed. Fire at will. Josh's hand slammed down on the controls. The ship's cannons roared to life. Plasma fire streaked through the void, cutting toward the war fleet. Jadasloff's voice was calm and steady. Let's see if they can keep up. The ship shot forward, plasma fire blazing around them as they raced toward the blockade. Josh's laughter echoed through the cockpit. Now this is pod racing. Jadasloff growled. Stop saying that. Josh laughed harder. Make me. The ship's internal lights flickered again, casting erratic shadows across the cockpit. Jadasloff's claws tapped against the console as he studied the fluctuating power readings. They had barely escaped the last ambush, but something still felt wrong. The damage from the previous attack shouldn't have caused this level of instability in the power core. Josh sat in the co-pilot seat, legs stretched out as he examined the engineering panel in front of him. His brow furrowed as he scrolled through the ship's diagnostics. Jadasloff, you might want to take a look at this. Jadasloff's golden eyes narrowed. What is it? Josh spun the display toward him. The power core's readings are off. Like, way off. It's not just damage from the fight. This looks deliberate. Jadasloff's tail stiffened. Explain. Josh scratched the back of his neck. The flow regulators are misaligned, but not in a way that could happen by accident. Someone had to manually adjust the power output. The system's been tampered with. Jadasloff's claws dug into the console. Sabotage. Josh nodded grimly. Yeah, and it's not just a little damage. If this keeps up, the core will overheat. Best case, we lose propulsion. Worst case, the core explodes. Jadasloff finished. His eyes glinted dangerously. Josh leaned closer to the display. It looks like someone installed a bypass into the core's cooling system. That's why the temperature keeps climbing. We need to shut it down or reroute it before it blows. Jadasloff's gaze darkened. Can you fix it? Josh's mouth twisted. Maybe, but it's not going to be pretty. Jadasloff's claws tightened on the controls. Do it. Josh swung out of his seat, heading toward the rear of the ship. Jadasloff adjusted their course, guiding the ship through a narrow asteroid belt. The ship's frame groaned under the pressure of rapid course adjustments. The proximity alarm blared, signaling incoming debris. Jadasloff swore under his breath and twisted the controls. The ship rolled hard to the left, narrowly avoiding a cluster of jagged rocks. His tail lashed behind him. Josh, we don't have much time. I'm working on it, Josh shouted from the engine room. The sound of metal clanging echoed through the ship. Jadasloff's eyes flicked toward the tactical display. A cluster of red dots appeared on the outer edge of the screen. More ships. Josh, Jadasloff growled. We have company. Josh's voice crackled through the comms. Yeah, well, I've got bigger problems right now. Jadasloff growled low in his throat. He pushed the thrusters to maximum, weaving through the asteroid field with practiced precision. A bolt of plasma fire streaked past the cockpit window, missing them by inches. The enemy ships were closing in fast. Josh's frustrated voice came over the comms. Found the bypass. But it's... Josh's breathing quickened. There's a feedback loop built into the coolant line. If I disconnect it, it'll trigger a secondary surge. Jadasloff's tail twitched. What happens if it surges? Josh's voice was grim. It'll blow the core. We'll be space dust. Jadasloff's jaw tightened. Can you disable it? Josh's voice was strained, not without rerouting the main conduits. Jadasloff's eyes darkened. What do you need? Josh's breath hitched. Manual override from the cockpit. Jadasloff's claws danced over the console. Done. Josh's voice sharpened. You didn't even ask how dangerous it is. Jadasloff's tail curled. I don't care. Josh laughed weakly. All right, Captain Lizard. On my mark, reroute the secondary line through the tertiary cooling system. Jadasloff's claws hovered over the controls. Ready. Josh's breath hissed through the comms. 3, 2, 1. Now. Jadasloff slammed his hand onto the console. The ship's frame shuddered violently as the power conduits rerouted. Red warning lights flashed across the display. The core's temperature shot upward, then began to drop. Josh's voice crackled through the comms. It's working. Hold it steady. Jadasloff adjusted the controls, fighting against the ship's shaking frame. Plasma fire exploded against the hull as the enemy ships closed in. Josh, I need those weapons back. Almost there, Josh shouted. Jadasloff's hands tightened over the controls. The lead enemy ship fired a volley of plasma. Jadasloff twisted the ship into a hard roll, narrowly avoiding the blast. Sparks exploded from the console. The targeting display flickered and died. Josh's voice cut through the chaos. Done. The ship's cannons powered up with a low hum. Jadasloff's eyes gleamed. Firing. The cannons roared to life, sending 2 beams of crimson light into the lead ship. The plasma tore through its shields, sending it into a spiraling death roll. The ship exploded in a burst of light. Josh stumbled back into the cockpit, breathless and covered in grease. Got it stabilized. Cooling system is back online. Jadasloff's gaze was sharp. And the bypass. Josh wiped his hands on his shirt. Removed. Whoever set that up knew what they were doing. Jadasloff's jaw tightened. Ketheri. Josh's mouth twisted. Yeah. This wasn't sabotage for the sake of sabotage. They wanted us dead. Jadasloff's gaze darkened. They almost succeeded. Josh leaned back into the co-pilot's seat. But they didn't. So what's the plan now? Jadasloff's tail flicked. We finished the race. Josh raised an eyebrow. That's it. After all this. Jadasloff's eyes gleamed. The Ketheri wanted us out of the race. That means they're afraid of us winning. Josh grinned. So, we make sure they regret it. Jadasloff's smile was sharp. Exactly. Josh's hands hovered over the targeting display. Well then, Captain Lizard, let's give them something to be afraid of. Jadasloff pushed the thrusters forward. The ship surged through the asteroid field, leaving the wreckage of the enemy ship behind. Josh's smile widened. Now this is pod racing. Jadasloff's tail lashed behind him. If you say that one more time. Josh laughed. You love it. Jadasloff didn't respond. His golden eyes were fixed on the horizon as the next gate shimmered into view. The race wasn't over. Not yet. But it would be soon. And the Ketheri wouldn't like the outcome. The stars blurred into long streaks of white as the ship shot forward at full speed. Jadasloff's claws gripped the controls tightly as the ship weaved through the last stretch of the course. The gravity of the nearby planet tugged at the hull, forcing him to constantly adjust the trajectory. Behind them, the remaining Ketheri ships were gaining ground fast. Josh was strapped into the co-pilot seat, eyes flicking between the power readings and the navigation display. We're running hot. That core's not going to hold much longer if you keep pushing it like this. Jadasloff's golden eyes narrowed. It'll hold. Josh's hands tightened on the console. Not if we get hit. Shields are already at 40%. One more direct shot, and we're dust. Jadasloff's tail twitched. Then don't get hit. Josh laughed breathlessly. Oh sure, easy as that. The ship's hull vibrated as a pulse of enemy fire grazed the aft section. The proximity alarm screamed to life. Jadasloff's hands moved in a blur across the console, rolling the ship into a sharp dive. Plasma bolts streaked past the cockpit, leaving behind glowing trails of heat. Josh swore under his breath. They're not letting up. Jadasloff's gaze darkened as he studied the tactical display. The Ketheri ships were forming a crescent formation, closing in on all sides. His claws tightened. They're trying to box us in. Josh's eyes widened. So what do we do? Jadasloff's smile. Josh frowned. Yeah, okay. Just one problem with that. Those are Ketheri warships. Heavily armored. Heavily armed. We've got, what, half-charged plasma cannons, and a cooling core held together with duct tape and prayers. Jadasloff's tail curled. So? Josh stared at him. So we're not getting through that alive. Jadasloff's eyes glinted. Not unless we give them a reason to hesitate. Josh's brow furrowed. You have a plan. Jadasloff's claws moved over the console, pulling up the ship's cargo schematic. His eyes narrowed as he scrolled through the inventory. We still have the emergency fuel cells. Josh's mouth twisted. Yeah, but those are rigged for emergency propulsion. You're not thinking of. Jadasloff's smile sharpened. Exactly. Josh sat forward. You want to use the fuel cells as weapons. Jadasloff's claws danced across the console. A controlled detonation should create enough of a blast to scatter their formation. We'll use the shockwave to slingshot out of their trap. Josh's mouth opened, then closed. That's insane. Jadasloff's tail flicked. Can you rig it? Josh exhaled sharply. Give me 3 minutes. You have 2. Josh swore and unstrapped himself from the co-pilot's seat. He rushed toward the rear of the ship, sliding into the engineering bay. His hands worked quickly, pulling open the emergency compartment. The fuel cells were locked behind a protective casing. Josh pulled out his toolkit and began rewiring the detonation sequence. Jadasloff's voice came through the comms. Josh. Josh grunted as he twisted a coupling into place. Working on it. The Ketheri are closing in. Josh's hands moved faster. Yeah, I heard you the first time. The ship rocked violently as another burst of plasma fire slammed into the shields. Sparks exploded across the ceiling. Josh's fingers slipped, nearly dropping the coupling. Josh. I've got it. Josh shouted, locking the final wire into place. All set. Detonation is armed. Jadasloff's claws hovered over the release switch. On my mark. Josh stumbled back toward the cockpit, strapping himself into the seat. This is crazy. Jadasloff's tail curled. Trust me. Josh's eyes narrowed. You better not get us killed. Jadasloff's hand hovered over the switch as the Ketheri ships closed in. Their cannons charged, plasma cores glowing bright blue. Hold. Jadasloff murmured. Josh's breath hitched. Jadasloff. Hold. The Ketheri ships unleashed a volley of plasma fire. Now. Jadasloff hit the switch. The fuel cells detonated in a blinding flash of white light. The shockwave ripped through the vacuum of space, slamming into the Ketheri ships and scattering them in all directions. The ship lurched violently as the blast waves slammed into the hull. Jadasloff twisted the controls, using the momentum to slingshot the ship out of the Ketheri's formation. The ship's engines roared as it accelerated toward the final gate. Josh's breathless laughter filled the cockpit. Holy hell. It worked. Jadasloff's eyes glinted. Of course it worked. Josh swore as the tactical display lit up with more incoming ships. Don't get cocky yet. More Ketheri are coming. Jadasloff's eyes narrowed. Let them. Josh's mouth opened to protest. But then he saw it. The final gate. A shimmering arch of light floated just beyond the reach of the Ketheri's weapons. The finish line. Jadasloff's hands tightened on the controls. We're almost there. Josh's gaze flicked toward the Ketheri ships. They're not backing down. Jadasloff's smile sharpened. Neither are we. The ship's engines screamed as Jadasloff pushed them to maximum power. The Ketheri ships opened fire, bolts of plasma streaking toward them. Josh's hand hovered over the weapons console. Permission to fire. Jadasloff's smile was predatory. Granted. Josh's hand slammed down on the firing controls. Twin beams of crimson light lanced through space, tearing into the nearest Ketheri ship. The enemy vessel exploded in a burst of white fire. Josh whooped. That's what I'm talking about. Jadasloff's eyes glinted. Focus. Josh's hands flew across the console. Shields down to 15%. This thing's not going to hold. Jadasloff's tail flicked. It doesn't have to. The ship raced toward the final gate. The Ketheri ships tightened their formation, readying another volley. Josh's breath hitched. We're not going to make it. Yes, we are. Jadasloff's claws adjusted the trajectory by a fraction of a degree. The ship's hull groaned under the pressure. The engines screamed as the temperature spiked dangerously high. Josh's eyes squeezed shut. Come on, come on. The ship passed through the gate in a burst of white light. Josh gasped. Did we? The tactical display lit up. Green text flashed across the screen. Racy. Josh's mouth opened and closed. No freaking way. Jadasloff's claws released the controls. His tail curled lazily behind him. Told you. Josh's breathless laugh filled the cockpit. I hate you so much right now. Jadasloff's smile was sharp. No, you don't. Josh's head thudded back against the seat. All right, Captain Lizard. Drinks are on me. Jadasloff's golden eyes glinted. Agreed. The ship floated in the docking bay, its hull scorched and battered from the race. The metallic hum of the engines slowly wound down as the ship's systems cooled. Jadasloff sat in the cockpit, his hands still resting on the controls. His golden eyes scanned the display, confirming what he already knew. They had won. Josh was slumped in the co-pilot's seat, his chest rising and falling heavily. Sweat glistened on his forehead as he slowly peeled off his harness. We actually did it. His voice was breathless. Jadasloff's tail curled lazily behind him. Of course we did. Josh laughed weakly. You make it sound like it was a sure thing. It was. Josh shook his head, running a hand through his damp hair. You're insane, you know that. Jadasloff's mouth curved into a sharp smile. So you've said. The docking bay doors slid open with a logus. A crowd of aliens and humans gathered at the edge of the platform, their voices raised in excitement. Jadasloff stood and stretched, his claws clicking against the floor as he stepped toward the exit ramp. Josh pushed himself to his feet and followed. The moment they stepped off the ship, a roar of applause filled the bay. A group of humans near the front were pumping their fists in the air, while several alien spectators whistled in admiration. The race officials stood nearby, their long, serpentine forms shimmering under the bright lights. Josh grinned. Looks like we made an impression. Jadasloff's tail flicked. That was the point. A tall alien with dark green scales approached. His eyes narrowed beneath his ceremonial headdress. Captain Jadasloff. Jadasloff's golden eyes gleamed. Commander Ralvik. Ralvik's gaze shifted toward the ship. A remarkable performance. I must admit, I doubted you would survive the final stretch. Jadasloff's smile sharpened. Doubt is the first mistake of the week. Ralvik's mouth curled into a thin smile, spoken like a true predator. His gaze slid toward Josh. And you, the human. Josh raised an eyebrow. That's me. You contributed to this victory. Josh smirked. Didn't blow up, did we? Ralvik's gaze lingered on him for a moment before returning to Jadasloff. You have earned the championship, and with it, he held up a small hexagonal device, the key to the Grand Hall. The crowd murmured as Jadasloff extended his clawed hand. Ralvik placed the device in his palm. The metal pulsed faintly with golden light. Josh's eyes narrowed. What's that? The key to the Trade Council, Jadasloff replied, and a seat at the table. Josh's brow furrowed. Wait, you mean? Jadasloff's eyes gleamed. We are no longer outcasts. Josh's mouth opened. Holy crap. Ralvik inclined his head. It has been centuries since a non-Cathari ship has won the grand race. His gaze darkened. The council will take notice. You have upset the balance. Jadasloff's tail curled. That was the idea. Ralvik's smile was thin. Be careful, Jadasloff. The council does not appreciate disruption. Jadasloff's eyes gleamed. Ralvik's gaze lingered on him for a moment longer before he turned and walked away, his long cloak trailing behind him. Josh rubbed the back of his neck. Okay, so what now? Jadasloff studied the key in his hand. We make them listen. Josh's brow furrowed. By doing what? Jadasloff's golden eyes narrowed. We proved ourselves in the race. Now we prove ourselves in the council. Josh laughed. You think they're just going to hand you power? Jadasloff's smile was cold. Of course not. Josh sighed. Of course not. Jadasloff's tail flicked as he walked toward the ship. We need to prepare. For what? Jadasloff glanced over his shoulder. For the next battle. Josh groaned. Can't we celebrate for 5 minutes before planning the next disaster? Jadasloff's smile sharpened. You call it a disaster. I call it an opportunity. Josh's hands slid into his pockets as he followed Jadasloff up the ramp. You've got a real problem. You know that. Jadasloff's claws tapped against the hull. And yet, you're still here. Josh's mouth twisted. Yeah, I'm an idiot. The ship's engines hummed to life beneath their feet. Josh slumped into the co-pilot seat as Jadasloff took the controls. So, where to now, Captain? Josh asked. Jadasloff's eyes glinted. To the council. Josh snorted. You've got some nerve, you know that. Jadasloff's smile widened. That's why we won. The ship lifted off the platform, its hull vibrating as the thrusters engage. The docking bay doors slid open, revealing the vast expanse of space beyond. Stars glittered against the darkness, and the glow of distant planets bathed the ship in pale light. Josh leaned back in his seat, arms crossed. You think they'll listen? Jadasloff's golden eyes narrowed. They won't have a choice. Josh shook his head with a quiet laugh. You really think we're going to change things? Jadasloff's claws tightened on the controls. We already have. The ship shot forward, disappearing into the darkness of space. The stars blurred into streaks of white as they entered hyperspace. Josh's eyes drifted toward Jadasloff. For the record, I still think you're crazy. Jadasloff's tail flicked lazily behind him. And yet, you're still here. Josh's mouth twisted into a reluctant smile. Yeah, I guess I am. Jadasloff's golden eyes gleamed. Good. Josh sighed, his gaze drifting toward the swirling patterns of hyperspace outside the window. So, about that drink you promised me. Jadasloff's smile was sharp. We'll celebrate when we've won the war. Josh's laugh was tired but genuine. Of course we will. The ship surged forward, vanishing into the starry void. The future lay ahead of them, uncertain,